President Trump is winding up a week-long trip abroad. He started in Belgium for the NATO summit, then to England, where that country is in turmoil dealing with its Brexit strategy. He'll finish with a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday in Finland. So far, some of his remarks at the NATO summit drew criticism from both Democrats and Republicans. That's where we pick up my conversation with Senator Dick Durbin. President Trump made it to Belgium for this week's NATO summit. He proceeded to scold Germany for being what he called captive of Russia and referred to the other allies as being delinquent when it comes to ponying up their share of defense spending. In fact, tweeted later it should be 4% of their GDP rather than 2% like it is now. What's your response, and isn't he right on the defense spending point?
I can tell you that the president's attack on NATO shows that he does not appreciate this alliance. For 75 years, the NATO alliance has kept America safe and Europe safe, and it continues to be the strongest alliance in the world. Those allies of ours, those friends in NATO, have stood by us, have put their men and women in uniform right next to ours to fight and sometimes die in causes that we share. And this president dismisses them with the back of the hand. He is turning on our friends and embracing adversaries like Vladimir Putin, whom he called a fine man the other day and congratulated him after his sham election. I don't get it. The president ought to stick with our friends and allies first and not be publicly criticizing him the way he's been.
How worried are you that NATO will collapse, and is it still relevant?
Well, I'm worried, very concerned, because the United States is a key part of NATO, and NATO is a key part of America's national security and the security of our allies around the world. President Trump has called this alliance obsolete. When I asked the Secretary of State the other day whether he felt it was obsolete, he said no. So there's a clear division within this administration. You just can't follow from day to day what this president is thinking.
What can Congress do to preserve NATO besides the symbolic resolution the Senate adopted this week?
It was more than symbolic. We had a vote this week in the United States Senate. Out of 100 senators, 99 present, 97 voted in favor of a strong alliance with NATO to continue. 97 out of 99. It's an indication of the strong bipartisan support of an alliance which the president, unfortunately, has been critical of.
But it doesn't carry the weight of law.
No, but I can tell you the appropriations that we pass will reflect our commitment to NATO in the future. There's no weakening of our commitment at the congressional level. We just can't understand this president's statements in Brussels.
This week, the Trump administration missed the deadline to reunite families separated at the border with Mexico for trying to come into this country illegally. What repercussions should there be for missing that deadline?
Well, first, it's up to a federal judge in San Diego, California, appointed by President Bush. He's the one who set the deadline and said it was inexcusable for our government to forcibly remove children from their parents. Now, the president publicly said 2 or 3 weeks ago he was going to abandon that policy, but he left 3,000 children hanging in the balance. It turns out this government of ours doesn't have records to link parents with kids. In fact, in one case, they don't know where the child could find his family. I mean, this is incredible to think this is happening in the United States of America. So I hope the judge puts the pressure on the administration, and instead of hiring more lawyers, I hope they're going to hire more social workers and people who can reunite these families.
How do you respond to legislation introduced this week by Congresswoman Diane Black to make entering the country illegally a felony as opposed to the misdemeanor it is now?
I think it's a dramatic overreaction. Anyone who is dangerous to the United States obviously needs to be treated as a dangerous criminal. But to argue that everyone presenting themselves at the border is a criminal felon under United States laws is ridiculous.
And all of this is evidence of the continued failure of Congress to address immigration reform. What will it take for Congress to make some meaningful changes, and where is there some consensus in this area?
Well, I'll tell you where there's consensus. We had a comprehensive immigration reform bill. I was one of the 8 senators who drew it up, and we passed it with 68 votes in the Senate 5 years ago. The Republicans in the House refused to even bring it up for debate or consideration, and they failed to pass any immigration legislation since then. The American people know that deporting 11 million people is unrealistic and never going to happen. What they want is comprehensive immigration reform on a bipartisan basis. We should return to the bill that we put together 5 years ago.
Senator, are you willing to vote for an immigration proposal that includes paying for a border wall? And what do the Democrats need in exchange?
You ought to take a look at this border and realize how ridiculous a wall is in some parts of the border. I voted for $40 billion in that comprehensive immigration bill to make our border safer. And it wasn't with an ancient wall. It was with technology, it was with oversight, it was with more personnel. It really used 21st century technology to keep our border safe and secure, something we all share. But the notion of building a wall just became a campaign talking point, and the president is stuck on it.
A lot of farmers in Illinois and Iowa feel like pawns in the back and forth of tariffs between the United States, China, and Europe. Another round of tariffs just announced. Farmers are seeing the value of corn and soybeans plummet. What do you think about the trade policy coming from the White House?
I can't follow it. The president announced a few weeks ago that our real trade adversary was Canada. Canada. It's the first time I've ever heard that suggestion. But the president is just hard to follow on this. He's firing in every direction. Today I met with soybean growers from across our state. We're the #1 soybean producing state in the nation, and our biggest customer is China. And right now, the Chinese have imposed a tariff which has reduced soybean prices by 20% in Illinois and corn prices by the same number. These farmers were kind of sad. They put their lives into their soybean operations, and now they're victims of this trade war that the president has initiated. I want to make sure we have strong trade agreements, and that if people are unfair with the United States and trade policies, that we have a recourse. But this notion of firing off in every direction at Canada and China and other places certainly doesn't suggest to me the president has a solid plan in mind.
My conversation with Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois. If you missed any of it here, you can catch all of it online at ourquadcities.com.